This is the story of a rapist. A man who didn't just go after women instead, he targeted 15-year-old minors. Not once, but 3 times. And somehow he slipped through the cracks of the justice system every single time. His name? Bernie Guindon. The man who built Satan's choice brick by brick, not for fame, but for revenge. That burning vendetta turned Satan's choice into one of the most dominant outlaw biker clubs in all of Canada. But what happened next? He went to prison for trafficking PCP. And when he got out, he jumped right back in. But this time, he played the game differently. Here's the real question. How does a man who once was Satan's choice retire as a Hell's Angel? And why did he marry the same woman twice? This is one of the most mind-bending, twisted tales in the outlaw world. So stick with us, because what's coming next will blow your mind. Early life. Bernie Guindon's story began on November 19, 1942, in the town of Hull, Quebec. His early world was forged in the fires of crime, instability, and sheer survival. Why? Well, because of his father, Lucien. Lucien was a small-time criminal and bootlegger who knew how to take advantage of loopholes in the system. He ruled the family with a mix of sharp intelligence and harsh discipline. He had bigger plans. When he moved to Ontario, he didn't just settle in. He saw an opportunity. His own family home, it wasn't just a place to live. He turned it into an after-hours bar. While the city slept and the legal bars shut their doors, Lucien's business came alive. He made money when others couldn't, selling alcohol long after liquor stores closed, catering to those who weren't ready to call it a night. In short, the Guindon family wasn't merely familiar with crime. They were deeply embedded in it. Yet, amid this chaos, Bernie's mother, Lucy, stood as a stark contrast to Lucien's rough persona. Lucy was a woman of faith. Deeply religious, she couldn't read or write. Her beliefs were her compass, guiding her through every hardship. As the family moved from Quebec to northern Ontario and finally to Oshawa, her world remained centered on faith. But for her son, Bernie, life told a different story. The streets didn't offer guidance. They offered lessons. And they weren't taught with prayers. They were taught with fists, fear, and survival. Crime wasn't some distant danger. It was his reality. He started boxing. In the ring, there were rules, discipline, control. Every punch he threw wasn't just for points. It was his way of pushing back against everything life had thrown at him. With every match, he wasn't just learning to fight. He was learning to endure. But no matter how many rounds he went, no matter how strong he became, one thing never changed. The war outside the ring wasn't over. His father, Lucien, had a cruel way of having fun. He often made his sons fight each other in wrestling matches just to entertain himself. For Bernie and his older brother, Jack, these fights weren't games. They fought it as a real sport. By the time Bernie was 15, he had reached his limit. He was tired of the way his father treated them and couldn't take it anymore. One day, when Lucien started hitting his mother, Bernie couldn't stay silent anymore. He snapped. Bernie fought back with everything he had. He punched his father again and again until Lucien finally collapsed to the floor. That day, Bernie kicked Lucien out of the house for good. He freed his family, and in many ways, freed himself too. After Lucien was gone, Bernie's mother eventually started a relationship with someone new. And then, when his mother's new boyfriend introduced him to a motorcycle, a new chapter began. That first motorcycle ride wasn't just exciting. It changed everything for Bernie. The speed, the feeling of freedom, and the power of the bike lit a fire in him. It sparked a passion that would shape the rest of his life. Growing up among scrapyards and tough fights, Bernie had faced a lot of pain. But those rough experiences helped shape who he became. All of it, the struggle, the thrill, the fight, came together to create the bold, rebellious, and unstoppable person the world would later know as Bernie Guindon. Mentorship by George Chuvallo. As Bernie Guindon worked on his fighting skills and grew more focused, from 1962 to 1967, Bernie, aged 20 to 25, encountered George Chuvallo in his prime. He was the Canadian heavyweight boxing champion. Chuvallo had seen many fighters in his time, but there was something different about Bernie. He saw raw talent, pure aggression, and natural instincts that showed real promise. For a short time, Bernie was trained under Chuvallo. He soaked up everything: how to stay disciplined, how to fight with precision, and how to control his power. The training didn't last long, but it left a lasting mark. It lit a fire inside Bernie that never went out. Chuvallo's impact on Bernie went far beyond teaching him how to throw a punch. He helped shape Bernie's mindset, one built on focus, control, and toughness. Years later, in 1969, after serving his first prison sentence, Bernie stood at a turning point. Hold that thought. We'll get to why he was arrested. He had spent years living wild and outside the law, but deep down, his love for fighting had never gone away. The idea of stepping back into a more disciplined world started calling to him. When that moment came, Bernie knew exactly who to turn to. Whether Bernie met Chuvalo again or just carried the lessons with him, something clicked. He began to refocus. For a short time, he truly thought about returning to boxing. But Bernie was never the kind of person to stick to just one road. In the end, the thrill of the open road and the wild outlaw lifestyle won out over the structure of the boxing ring. Formation of Satan's Choice. In 1965, Bernie Guindon made a bold move that would define his place in the outlaw biker world. He didn't just join a motorcycle club, he started one. In the city of Oshawa, he founded Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club. In start name alone wasn't enough to strike fear. But under Bernie's strong and focused leadership, the club became more than just a group of bikers. It grew into a powerful movement. Thanks to Bernie's sharp instincts and strategic thinking, Satan's Choice expanded fast. The club took over more territory and gained members at an impressive speed. By the late 1960s, it had become a major force, not just in Canada, but worldwide. With chapters nationwide, Satan's Choice surged to power, becoming the world's second-largest outlaw motorcycle club, outranked only by the infamous Hells Angels. But creating something that powerful wasn't easy. Before the club could rise, Bernie had to survive the chaos of Canada's outlaw biker scene. It was like a battlefield, where conflict was everywhere, and even staying alive was challenging. In that rough world, every day was a fight. But through it all, Bernie kept pushing forward, laying the groundwork for the legacy that would make him a legend. Satan's Choice, first feud. Did you know Satan's Choice existed 4 years before Guindon made it a movement? Yes. In 1961, Don Norris started Satan's Choice, but soon, another biker gang named the Black Diamond Riders started a fight with Satan's Choice. They were ruthless enemies who wouldn't back down. By 1962, the Black Diamond Riders overpowered the original Satan's Choice. Satan's Choice, original version, was completely crushed and had to disband. Bernie was already part of Satan's Choice during this time. Of course, he wasn't in control yet, but he witnessed the destruction firsthand. Instead of quitting, Bernie regrouped. To do that, he made a smart move. In 1965, he created a new club called the Phantom Riders. Then he merged that club with 3 other clubs: the Canadian Lancer, the Wild Ones, the Throttle Twisters. He revived the name Satan's Choice with full approval from original founder Don Norris. But this time, it was Bernie's empire. Now Bernie wanted payback. Backed by a strong, united force, Bernie sent his men to confront the rival gang. The fight between Black Diamond Riders and Satan's Choice is known as the Battle of Pebblestone. In that savage brawl, Bernie Guindon's Golden Hawk Riders went head-to-head with the fierce Black Diamond Riders. Fists flew, people hit the pavement, and any idea of mercy was thrown out the window. But through all the violence and chaos, Bernie never backed down. Even as his club took heavy hits, he stood strong, refusing to be scared or defeated. Instead of breaking him, the fight fueled him. Bernie realized something important. The only way to beat them was to bring all the smaller biker clubs together. With clear focus and fierce determination, he made it happen. He united those separate groups into one powerful force. Out of the blood and fire of the Battle of Pebblestone, Bernie didn't just survive, he came out stronger than ever. Bernie Guindon wasn't satisfied with just winning fights. He wanted to completely break his enemies down, bit by bit. By 1968, the war he had led against the Black Diamond Riders had done exactly that. Once a powerful name in Toronto's outlaw world, the Riders were left with only 15 members after repeated defeats and public embarrassments at Bernie's hands. Meanwhile, Satan's Choice was only getting bigger and stronger. Bernie hadn't just ended a rivalry, he had destroyed one of his last big obstacles. And with that threat gone, his outlaw empire continued to grow. He was now a true leader, ready to lead his growing empire to the top. The rise of Bernie Guindon. In 1965, a gritty documentary captured Bernie Guindon's defiant edge, catapulting him from local biker to outlaw legend in straight-laced Toronto. To young viewers craving something raw and rebellious, Satan's Choice was the best option, a movement they could believe in. By 1970, Satan's Choice had become a true powerhouse, with 12 chapters across Canada and around 300 members. The Toronto chapter alone had about 50 riders, making it one of the strongest in the country. What started as a small act of rebellion had grown into a full-blown empire, with Bernie Guindon firmly at the center, the man who built it all. But with rising power came more attention from the law. By the end of 1966, a police cruiser was almost always parked outside Bernie's house in Oshawa. It was a clear message. The authorities were watching him closely, waiting for him to slip up. Bernie wasn't shaken. If anything, the constant police presence only added to his image as a true outlaw. It made him feel even more defiant. Then came 1967, the year everything changed, and Bernie Guindon made sure no one would ever forget his name. Around 200 bikers and their partners rolled into St. Catharines for what they called the Field Day, a gathering of freedom, rebellion, and brotherhood. Satan's Choice was there, loud and proud, but not everyone liked the look of it. To the police, it wasn't a party, it was a threat. So they sent in the storm. Nearly 100 officers, fully geared for a riot, moved in fast. expecting to crush the gathering before it could spiral out of control. Helmets on, batons ready, marching in like they owned the place. But they weren't ready for Bernie Guindon. Standing calm in the center of it all, Bernie didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. Instead, he gave a quiet command to his crew. Be cool, let them come. And just like that, the chaos the cops expected never came. The bikers didn't scatter. They didn't lash out. They stood their ground, organized, focused, and 2 steps ahead. And more importantly, they outnumbered the police 2 to 1. The message was clear. This wasn't a gang of reckless thugs. This was a brotherhood, and Bernie was its spine. The riot squad took one look, then backed off. No clash, no batons swinging, just a silent retreat. That day didn't just mark a win for Satan's choice. It marked the rise of Bernie Guindon. He wasn't just muscle. He was mind, a tactician, a man who could stop a war before it started. And from that moment forward, he wasn't just respected, he was legendary. But what happens when a leader like Guindon gets taken down because of allegedly raping a 15-year-old girl? Sexual assaulter, Guindon. By 1967, Bernie was changing the outlaw biker world in big ways. Bernie Guindon wasn't just building Satan's choice into a powerhouse, he was rewriting the rules of the outlaw world as he went. Most clubs back then, they kept things tight and white. A black outlaw biker from Montreal, Rod Malloy, walked straight up to Bernie. Just a man looking for a place to belong. Bernie didn't see skin color. He saw the backbone. And above all, he saw a brother. He welcomed Malloy in and handed him something even bigger. He gave him the reins to lead. That's how Satan's choice ended up with its first black chapter. Rod Malloy, president, Montreal, their turf. But Bernie wasn't done yet. Just a few months later, in September, he pulled off another milestone. He brought the entire club together, every chapter, every rider, for Satan's Choice's first ever national convention. It didn't happen in some big city ballroom. It happened on a farmhouse in Markham Township, just outside Toronto. No spotlight, just unity. But it didn't go unnoticed. At midnight, 23 police officers raided the property, hoping to surprise the bikers. Once again, Bernie stayed cool under pressure. He called out to his crew, be cool, let them come. They had nothing but empty beer bottles and crushed cans. But when the cops stormed in, they fought back. Glass shattered through the air. But the police weren't backing down for good. A few hours later, they returned, with backup. 84 officers, full gear, no room for negotiation. This time they came to take control, and they did. In the second raid, 55 bikers were arrested, 9 women too. It was a flex, a statement. This is the moment when Bernie Guindon got arrested for the first time in 1968. Why? For sexually assaulting a minor. Yes, in October 1968, Bernie was charged with sleeping with a 15-year-old girl. He was claiming he thought she was 18. The court didn't buy it. In 1969, he was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to 5 years. Bernie called it set up to trap him, but the damage was done. Inside, labeled with a skin beef, he became a marked man in the prison pecking order. He, of course, lost every shred of his reputation. Yet even behind bars, his grip on Satan's Choice never loosened. Power fight with Guindon. Right then, the Hells Angels made their move, brutally set on expanding into Canada. The American outlaw empire reached out, offering Bernie a deal few would dare refuse. A patchover deal. It meant folding Satan's Choice into the Hells Angels empire, trading his patch for theirs. Most people would have seen this as a huge opportunity, but not Bernie. To him, it was an insult. Bernie Guindon was proudly Canadian and fiercely independent. He made his position crystal clear. Satan's Choice would stay true to itself. They wouldn't trade their identity to become just another chapter of an American club, even one as big as the Hells Angels. Just 1 year before his arrest, Guindon turned his focus to wiping out the competition. From June to August 1968, he launched a brutal campaign against a rival gang called the Crossbreeds. The attack was relentless. By the time it ended, the Crossbreeds were destroyed, broken, and forced to disband. The message to the underworld was loud and clear. If you challenge Satan's Choice, you don't just lose, you lose everything. By the end of 1968, Satan's Choice wasn't just the largest outlaw biker club in Canada, and Bernie Guindon, he wasn't just a gang leader, he was a fighter in every sense. Then came 1971. He was granted parole, but with one strict condition: no contact with Satan's Choice. So, Bernie Guindon stepped into a different kind of arena, the boxing ring. He represented Canada at the Pan American Games in Cali, Colombia, and fought his way to a bronze medal. This victory added another layer to the mystery that was Bernie Guindon. Even before competing internationally, Bernie had already made a name for himself in Canada's boxing world. He had won top titles in the Ontario Golden Gloves, Eastern Canadian Golden Gloves, and Canadian Golden Gloves. But when it came to chasing his dream of competing in the 1972 Olympics in Munich, his past caught up with him. Because he broke parole by reaching out to Satan's Choice, he was thrown back behind bars. His criminal reputation overshadowed his shot at Olympic glory. He was Satan's Choice, the living symbol of everything the club stood for. A life of two worlds. Bernie Guindon's life was a story of two worlds. In one, he was a fierce boxer. In the other, he was a powerful outlaw. He could have followed the path to Olympic greatness. But by 1972, it was clear. The outlaw life had its grip on him. Bernie Guindon was caught between two futures, but in the end, the roar of motorcycles and the loyalty of the biker brotherhood pulled him in for good. But the challenges kept coming. He was released from prison in 1973. In 1976, just when it looked like he was regaining control, he was hit with a major blow. A conviction for conspiracy to make and distribute drugs. A major turning point came on August 6, 1975, when a huge police operation targeted Satan's Choice. It was aimed directly at the drug empire Bernie had built, worth millions. The bust shook the club to its core. Inside the club, betrayal brewed. A man named McCann, secretly working as an informant, tried to get Bernie locked away for good, hoping to take over his position as national president. What they uncovered was staggering. 6 million PCP tablets and a massive drug operation, pulling in an estimated $60 million every month. This wasn't low-level dealing, it was a full-blown drug empire. And with that bust, it was clear. The law had finally caught up with Bernie Guindon in a major way. But even with arrests, betrayals, and people trying to bring him down, Bernie's name only grew more powerful. His refusal to back down, to follow rules set by a system that wanted to crush him, turned him into a legend. Bernie Guindon lived a life of sharp contrasts. Through every trial, every fight, Bernie stood by his club, his family, and who he truly was. He wasn't just the leader of Satan's Choice, he was Satan's choice. Even as the law tried to close in on him and the world tried to bring him down, his legend kept growing. The sentence, 17 years in prison, wasn't just time. It was a test of how long he could hold on to power. While he was locked up, enemies circled. Rival clubs like the violent Popeyes in Montreal declared war on Satan's Choice and even put a hit out on Bernie's life. Price of power. The arrest sent shockwaves through Satan's Choice. News of Bernie Guindon's capture spread quickly, shaking the club to its core. Members came to visit him in prison, but not all were there out of loyalty. Among them were Cecil Kirby, a feared enforcer who would later switch sides and become a mafia hitman and bomber, and Frank Lenti, another major player in the club's criminal operations. These visits were tense, full of unspoken power plays and shifting loyalties. Even from behind bars, Bernie stayed on as national president. But his absence created cracks in the foundation. Some members remained fiercely loyal, while others saw a chance to rise in the ranks, or even break away entirely. Kirby's eventual defection to the mafia was a clear sign that the once solid brotherhood was starting to splinter. By May 1976, the verdict came down hard. Bernie and Temp Plain were convicted of running a large-scale narcotics operation, making, distributing, and selling drugs. Bernie was given a 17-year sentence, a punishment meant to sideline him for good. But if Bernie Guindon's life had shown anything, it was this. You could knock him down, but you couldn't count him out. The crashing empire. With Bernie Guindon locked up, the foundation of Satan's Choice began to crack. The club, once united under his strong leadership, started to fall apart. In July 1977, several chapters didn't just split. They switched sides and patched over to the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. For years, Bernie had kept a tense alliance with the Outlaws. But now, from behind prison walls, he could only watch as they took his own men. He was powerless to stop it. By the time he walked out of prison in 1984, the once mighty Satan's Choice was a shell of what it had been. Only a few chapters were left standing. But Bernie Guindon wasn't someone who took betrayal lightly. As soon as he was free, he set out to settle old scores. At the top of his list was Bill Hull, a former chapter president who had defected to the Outlaws during the 1977 split. Bernie had waited years for this moment. He may have lost most of his club, his power, and his reach. But one thing he hadn't lost was his reputation. And as he went looking for Bill Hull, one thing was clear. Bernie Guindon wasn't going to fade into history. He still had a fight left in him, a bounty, betrayal, and a divided club. Bernie Guindon wasn't just angry about his 1975 arrest. He was furious and hungry for revenge. He blamed an informant named McCann for the takedown, and, even while still in prison, he made a bold move. He put a $10,000 bounty on McCann's head. In the outlaw biker world, that wasn't just a threat, it was a powerful message. Bernie was letting everyone know that even behind bars, he still had control, and crossing him came with a deadly price. But this act of revenge didn't just shake things up. It tore Satan's Choice apart from the inside. McCann's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was political. It opened a deep wound within the club that wouldn't heal easily. Bernie's battle was no longer just with rival gangs or the police. It had become a civil war inside his own empire. And by the time he got out in 1984, it was clear. Satan's Choice had changed forever. It would never return to what it once was. Life in prison was a battlefield of its own for Bernie Guindon. From the moment he entered prison, the tension was thick. He could feel the eyes on him. But Bernie wasn't someone who backed down. When prison officials offered him protective custody, he didn't hesitate to say no. He wasn't going to hide. He insisted he was innocent, and he took every hit, every threat, without flinching. Over time, his toughness and refusal to break began to shift opinions. Little by little, even his harshest critics started to see him differently. One prison psychologist described him simply but powerfully: rock solid. Unlike most inmates who cracked under pressure, Bernie stayed calm, focused, and completely unshaken, even in the worst conditions. Love and laughter behind bars. During his time behind bars, he began getting passionate, deeply personal letters from a female university student who had seen his photo in a news article. These weren't just friendly notes. They were sexually explicit and full of admiration. For most prisoners, attention like that would be unheard of. But for Bernie, it was just another layer to his larger-than-life persona. Their connection didn't stay on paper for long. They arranged conjugal visits, and soon she became pregnant, with twins. In a story that added even more to his legend, they got married right there in the prison chapel. Despite everything, his tough image, his outlaw status, Bernie never lost his sense of humor. When people made comments about his virility, he'd flash a grin and joke, "Hung like a stud field mouse." It was classic Bernie, humble, sarcastic, and never too serious about himself. When he was released in 1984, everything had changed. His club had splintered, his empire was weaker, and old enemies were waiting. But Bernie didn't return quietly. He came back with fire in his heart, and a mission to finish what he started. His story wasn't just about crime or power. It was about a man who refused to be erased. Handling crumbled club Satan's Choice wasn't finished. It was just getting started on a second act. This time, Guindon learned from the past. He steered away from the messy, high-risk PCP operation that had once taken him down. Instead, he turned to cocaine trafficking, a cleaner, more controllable business. He found the perfect customers in Alberta's oil and pipeline workers, tough men with cash to spend and a hunger for partying. It was a new hustle for a new chapter in his life, and once again, Bernie Guindon was proving he knew how to survive, adapt, and lead. Bernie Guindon set up a cocaine supply chain from Toronto to Alberta, flooding the market and pulling in serious cash. But this wasn't just about profit, it was about survival. If Satan's Choice was going to rise again, it needed money, strength, and influence. Bernie understood exactly how to make that happen. Burned by old alliances, especially those with American clubs that had led to betrayal and division, Guindon made a firm decision. No more deals with US-based biker gangs. Instead, he focused on building bonds with other Canadian clubs like the Lost Bravos and the Grim Reavers. In his eyes, Canadian unity was the key to avoiding chaos. Letting big American groups in only brought instability and infighting, even though tensions still simmered within his own ranks and rivalries never fully disappeared. Bernie's smart alliances and careful strategy kept Satan's Choice alive and relevant. He wasn't just rebuilding a club, he was trying to rebuild the foundation of the Canadian outlaw biker world, one calculated move at a time. The biker world was constantly shifting, and by the early 2000s, Satan's Choice, once Canada's most feared club, was under growing pressure. The police were cracking down hard, and rival gangs were gaining ground. Faced with the threat of extinction, the club made a bold, historic move. It merged with the most powerful outlaw biker group in the world, the Hells Angels. With that patch over, Bernie Guindon officially became a Hells Angel. The name on his back changed, but the outlaw spirit in him stayed the same. He remained a respected figure in the biker world for a few more years, a living legend to those who knew his history. But in 2006, after decades of fighting, riding, leading, and rebuilding, Bernie Guindon retired. Still, his road to retirement wasn't quiet. On December 29, 2000, Guindon made the hard decision to step down as national president. He handed over leadership to Andre Wee. But Bernie wasn't done making moves. In one last strategic act, He and the remaining Satan's Choice members rode to Montreal and officially patched over to the Hells Angels. It wasn't about climbing higher, it was about surviving in a world that was closing in. By 2012, Bernie Guindon was done pretending. He openly admitted that the patchover to the Hells Angels wasn't about pride, ambition, or loyalty. It was about survival. Satan's Choice had been on the brink. Without the merger, Satan's Choice would have been picked apart, through violence, arrests, or being absorbed piece by piece. So Bernie made the only move that would protect what was left of his club. He gave them a future, even if it meant giving up the name he had built. But that decision came at a price. Even after the merger, Bernie's path wasn't smooth. By 2006, worn down by decades of war, both on the streets and in his body, he knew it was time to step away. His retirement from the Hells Angels, however, didn't come without friction. Steve G., a high-ranking member, tried to pull him back in, pressuring Bernie to stay involved in criminal dealings. But Guindon was done. The man who had spent his life in the center of chaos was ready to walk away, but not without one last test of will. He took Bernie's Hells Angels jacket and set it on fire. It was a show of dominance, a message meant to assert control. But in the outlaw world, respect still matters, even in conflict. Before Bernie walked away for good, he was given a Hells Angels ring. It was more than just a parting gift. It was a final sign of respect, a quiet acknowledgement that no matter what, Bernie Guindon had earned his place among them. Even when his world collapsed and he turned to drugs to dull the pain behind prison walls, Bernie's core never changed. He was always a fighter. As the biker world evolved and Satan's Choice eventually became part of the Hells Angels, the scene shifted, but Bernie Guindon's name still carried weight. His story remains a powerful reminder of what it means to live by your own rules. Fearless, unshaken, and unforgettable. A true outlaw to the end. Guindon loved life. In September 2009, Bernie Guindon made a surprising and deeply personal move. He remarried Suzanne Nikki Blay, nearly 50 years after they first exchanged vows back in 1961. Nikki had been a steady presence through it all: the street wars, the prison years, the betrayals, and the endless chaos of outlaw life. No matter what came their way, she never truly left. And after decades of turmoil, they found their way back to each other, closing a circle that had begun half a century earlier. But even as love reignited, the core conflict in Bernie's life remained: the outlaw's dilemma. Time and again, after serving prison time, he tried to walk a straight path. He looked for steady work and made efforts to build a normal life. But the call of the road, the sound of roaring engines, and the loyalty of brotherhood ran too deep. The outlaw world wasn't just something he lived in, it was part of who he was. This struggle between leaving it all behind and being pulled back in is what shaped Bernie Guindon's legacy. It's what made him not just a man or a biker, but a myth. His life wasn't just lived, it was followed, analyzed, and turned into legend. A story of love, war, rebellion, and a man who could never be tamed. Peter Edwards' biography, Hard Road, Bernie Guindon, and the Reign of the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, offered an unflinching look at a man who was both feared and respected. Someone who balanced brutality with discipline, chaos with control. The book revealed the layers behind the legend: the fierce fighter, the strategic leader, and the relentless survivor who built an empire his way, by his rules. Bernie Guindon wasn't just another biker. He became the face of an entire culture. As the architect of Canadian outlaw biker life, he didn't just shape Satan's Choice. He transformed the entire scene across the country. At the heart of his mission was something deeply personal: a strong belief in Canadian identity. His nationalism wasn't just talk, it was a fight. While some saw it as patriotism, others called it obsession. But Bernie made one thing clear: he would not let Canada's biker scene be taken over by American clubs. Through courtroom battles, bloody street wars, and betrayals from inside his own ranks, Guindon fought to protect something bigger than himself: loyalty, brotherhood, and the soul of an outlaw organization that lived outside the rules of society. But that kind of life came at a heavy price. By his later years, the weight of Bernie Guindon's life, years of street fights, prison time, betrayal, and unrelenting struggle, was written all over his body. The scars were real, the pain deep, and the empire he once ruled had faded under the strain of broken trust and shifting allegiances. But his legacy remained untouched. Bernie Guindon wasn't just another biker, he was a force of nature. A man who didn't just survive the outlaw world, he shaped it. They called him Bernie the Frog, a nickname that nodded to his French-Canadian roots and his almost magical ability to slip through legal traps. No matter how many times the law closed in, no matter how tight the grip, Bernie always found a way out. He wasn't simply a man who broke the rules. He rode the line between chaos and control, making him both feared and admired. To some, he was a criminal genius. To others, a true outlaw icon, a man who lived fast, led hard, and built an empire on the thunder of motorcycles and loyalty bound in blood. But even the fiercest outlaws don't ride forever. After 2006, Bernie quietly left the biker world. Though Satan's choice had officially patched over to the Hells Angels, the spirit of the club, and the world Bernie created, still echoes through Canadian outlaw culture. Law enforcement, historians, and bikers alike continue to study him, trying to understand the man behind the legend. He didn't go out in flames or disgrace. Instead, he left with a quiet nod to time. A recognition that even the wildest lives must eventually slow down. Bernie Guindon's life was a story of power, pain, loyalty, and rebellion. From rekindled love to relentless survival, he carved his name into Canadian history, not as a victim of his times, but as a man who lived entirely on his own terms. Fearless, uncompromising, unforgettable.